Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today for the Medical Device Startup Landscape webinar. We're going to give everyone just another minute or two to join and then we'll get started. Thanks. Okay everyone, thanks for waiting. My name is Riley from CB Insights and I'll be walking you through a few housekeeping items before turning it over to John for the presentation. First, don't worry about taking notes as we'll be sending both the slides and the recording to you right after the webinar. Second, if you have any technical difficulty during the webinar, your best bet is to reach out to the Citrix Help Desk. You can also tweet at us or send an email to webinar@cbinsights.com and we'll do our best to help. But again, we'll be sending out everything afterwards, so don't worry too much. Okay, so as with all of our webinars, we'll be moving through a lot of data and insights and doing it pretty quickly. But we also want to make sure we're answering your questions and keeping this relevant. So throughout the webinar, feel free to ask questions using the questions tab within GoToWebinar or via Twitter using the hashtag #MedDevice. And of course, we're at CB Insights. So a little bit about CB Insights. We're a private market database. We collect all the company information on private companies, including financing, investment activity related to them, to help our clients answer questions about major trends, competitor strategy, potential disruptors, and much more. Here you can see a few of our happy customers. Now a little bit about John. John is a tech research analyst here at CB Insights and a graduate from Johns Hopkins University. He focuses on digital health, therapeutics, med devices, and the media. He previously attended Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School and worked for Ben Franklin Technology Partners. I'm going to hand it off to him for the presentation.
Thank you, Riley. So today we're going to be talking about a very old industry, one that has gone through plenty of iteration over the past few hundred years, but one that is just now undergoing a fundamental shift in both the way it is defined as well as integrated with our everyday lives. That industry is the industry of medical devices. And throughout this presentation, we're going to be reviewing the current state of medical device regulation, go over some investment trends and active corporates participating in deals to med device startups, as well as spotlight the rise of AI being used in medical devices. We're going to finish up with some information on exits and recent mergers and acquisitions, and then a few thoughts on the road ahead for the medical device sector. So what is a medical device? Well, according to the FDA, a medical device is an instrument, including a part of an instrument, which is intended for use in the diagnosis, treatment, or prevention of disease. Also, a medical device is one that is intended to affect the function of the body or structure through non-chemical methods. What this means is pharmaceuticals such as Tylenol or insulin, which affect the body through chemical methods, are not legally medical devices. Now, devices span from anything from wheelchairs and prosthetics, as you see on the left, but also include diagnostic products such as pregnancy tests and MRIs. Now, devices have come a long way in the past 200 years, from the crude prosthetics, as you see above on the left, to the one used by Paralympic athlete Sarah Reinstein on the bottom. Now, it's important to understand the definition because once a medical device is classified as such, they then fall into 3 categories, each subject to its own regulation. Now, the classes are based on the amount of risk posed to the patient, ranging from examples like floss or bandages, as you see in Class 1, up through condoms in Class 2 and heart implants in Class 3. As you move up in class, the regulatory burden increases as well. Now, for example, in Class 1s can often be bought at your local pharmacy and are exempt from major regulations. Now, meanwhile, most of Class 2 devices require something called a 510K clearance. This means that the device is at least as safe as a device already on market, and they have to attain this clearance before being marketed to consumers. Now, when you go to Class 3 devices, you're looking at neurostimulators, which are implanted in the brain, cardiac defibrillators, as well as heart implants. All these devices need to have gone through extensive clinical trials in order to demonstrate proper safety and efficacy, and these devices are consequently not sold direct to consumer. So a question that might be on a lot of our minds today is, when is an app a medical device? When do I know that? Well, the FDA has released guidance on this very issue. In 2015, they released the Mobile Medical Applications Report, which announced that it would be taking a tailored approach to regulating medical devices, since so many devices now have the ability to connect to and communicate with other devices. For example, one of the guidances that they released is seen here, and mobile apps are considered medical devices when they use a sensor connected to a mobile platform, or measure blood oxygen and glucose, or analyze images of the skin using algorithms. There's a few startups doing that in order to diagnose melanoma, for instance. A good example of this is the startup Gauss Surgical, as you see on the left-hand side. Gauss is developing a monitoring system for surgical blood loss, and this runs on an iPad. And Gauss actually had to attain 510K approval, as we just spoke about, for this device. In fact, in the US, the vast majority of devices that come to market are lower risk, and so they can use the 510K clearance pathway to gain marketing approval. So in terms of the current regulatory landscape, which is constantly changing as we see here, it's important to note that the FDA and its counterpart in the UK, the MHRA, have both updated their guidances on software as a medical device in just the past 2 years. In general, regulation around software as a medical device is a very dynamic landscape right now and is subject to change in the years to come. So now that we covered what is a medical device, let's talk about what is not a medical device. Technologies such as pharmaceuticals, as I spoke about, are not devices because despite treating diseases, they work in a chemical manner. Now, other examples like billing software or medical records are not devices because they do not diagnose or treat conditions. This also includes apps and wearables that do not diagnose, treat, or prevent disease. However, apps and wearables are tricky. They tend to fall in a regulatory gray area, especially now, depending on the type of claims that they make. Such as startups such as Owlet Care on the right-hand side, as well as Fitbit, are not considered medical devices because they're intended as health and wellness monitors. And so they don't make the claim to prevent, diagnose, or treat a medical condition. On the other hand, you have companies such as Gluco, which we're going to talk about later in their presentation, which synchronize data from a glucose monitor to a smartphone. And these are considered medical devices because they do make those sort of claims. So now let's dive into equity funding trends and top deals. So the medical device market has seen over $20 billion across 2,652 deals just since 2013. On an annual basis, funding to the medical device companies has been relatively static, hovering around $4 billion per year. However, in 2017, we already jumped to $2.4 billion, more than half of 2016's total, over 251 deals. This jump in deal flow is mostly explained by an increase in deals to seed and angel rounds in Q1 of this year. The jump in funding, on the other hand, is explained by about two things. One, there's a large $800 million round to Verily, and two, Q1 recorded twice the number of rounds, over $50 million compared to Q1 of 16. Further, as more wearables are entering the market that fit the definition of a medical device, it is possible that we'll see both funding and deal flow grow in light of this new product category. On a quarterly basis, medical device funding has increased for the past 3 quarters and actually reached a 4-year high of $1.9 billion in Q1 of 17, over 180 deals for reasons that we just explained. Part of this funding was explained by Verily's $800 million raise from Temasek Holdings. Deal flow also hit a high in Q1, reaching 180. So where is all this money going to? Well, medical devices are attacking a diverse range of specialties, anything from orthopedics and neurology to oncology and ophthalmology. Here I just want to focus for a second on ophthalmology. There's a lot of startups focused on the treatment of glaucoma and retinitis pigmentosa, trying to prevent blindness or treat it. We have companies such as Ivantis and Retina Implant. Ivantis is actually backed by Ascension Ventures. And then we also have companies targeting nearsightedness, presbyopia, such as AcuFocus, which is backed by Kohlberg, Kravis, and Roberts. Now, if we take a look at the oncology market, I just want to point out a few notable startups. We're seeing startups such as Reflexion Medical, which is dealing in radiotherapy, as well as Mevion, which is dealing in proton therapy, and Adaptive Biotechnologies, which is in immunosequencing diagnostics. Adaptive is actually backed by Illumina and Celgene, and Reflexion is backed by Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Venrock, and Sofinnova. So we're seeing a lot of big names take real stakes in some of these medical device companies. Another specialty to talk about is neurology. Companies such as NeuroPace are raising very large rounds. They raised $140 million in total, and they're backed by NEA, Kleiner Perkins, Johnson & Johnson, among many others. There's also a company called NICO, which works in the field of minimally invasive neurosurgery, such as skull-based surgery and spinal surgery, and they've already raised $41 million from Square One Bank and River Cities Capital. NeuroPace is actually developing an implantable neuromodulation technology for the treatment of epilepsy. So if we take a look at deal share by stage from 2013 through 2017, in 2016 we see that early stage deals were 31% of all deals. On average, early stage, which is seed and Series A deals, were about 33% since 2013. So this is right on the mark. Mid-stage, which is Series B and Series C deals, have averaged about 18%, and in 2016 it were 17%, also right on that mark there. Late-stage deals, Series D and Series E, were 12% on average since 2013, and in 2016 were also 12%. So if we take a look at the most active investors in medical devices, we're kind of seeing a broad range of categories. The top investors involve major VCs such as NEA, Versant Ventures, life science-focused OrbiMed Advisors, high-tech Grunderfonds in Germany, and Domain Associates, as well as medical device giants and pharma giants such as Boston Scientific, who we're going to spend some time on later, and Johnson & Johnson jumping in. Now, if we take a look at a very specific subset of companies that we refer to as smart money VCs, a smart money VC is any top VC based on portfolio strength and exit history, and this includes firms such as NEA, Kleiner Perkins, Khosla Ventures, and General Catalyst. Among those, NEA and Kleiner Perkins are by far the most active in medical devices. They do share one co-investment, that is NeuroPace, who we just spoke about, dealing in seizure prevention. The most recent NEA med device investment is Intrinsic Therapeutics, and they're dealing in spinal care. A few other smart money VCs I just want to point out: General Catalyst, Bessemer Venture Partners, and Khosla Ventures have all made at least 2 deals to medical device companies since 2013. Khosla is an interesting company because they're actually interested in rapid testing. They made deals to a company called Two Poor Guys, which, despite the name, is a very interesting company. They're dealing in universal biomarker testing. They also made a deal to Genelite, which is in rapid blood diagnostics using silicon photonics. Silicon photonics is an emerging field that leverages the infrastructure made in the semiconductor industry and is now applying that to diagnostics. Just to explain what Two Poor Guys is, Two Poor Guys has developed a handheld system that works like a glucose monitor, though its disposable test strips can detect virtually any kind of molecule, or so that's the goal. So essentially what they do is allow for single molecule testing in a small and inexpensive form factor. So it works like a glucose monitor. However, their business model is based on the Apple App Store, where diagnostic assays are developed by third parties and then adapted to their platform. This information is then transmitted wirelessly through the cloud and can be used in conjunction with platforms such as telemedicine or clinical trials. But the ultimate goal is to track the global spread of disease. The company has already raised nearly $30 million. Vinod Khosla, who led that deal, has stated that the capital requirements for bringing a test to market are now more like software companies. He's saying this because there's nothing for the developers to manufacture, and they just design the assays. This kind of lends itself to a trend that we're going to be talking about later, with medical devices kind of moving into the territory formerly known only to software companies. So if we take a look here at the global spread of medical device deals, it's clear to see that the United States is leading with 77% of global deal share since 2013. Israel and the United Kingdom took second with 4% each. But I just want to point out some other deals that you may not see here. Large deals were seen in Japan as well, to companies such as Panasonic Healthcare, as well as the UK with companies such as Oxford Nanopore Technologies, and Israel with companies such as Sysera Medical Electronics. To put it a little more visually, here we identified countries with a high density of private medical device startups and highlighted the top 3 most well-funded in each country. I just want to point out a few here. There's Endomaster in Singapore. Endomaster is a robotic surgery system for gastrointestinal tumors. Another company, Vivostat in Denmark, is actually working on advanced non-invasive sensors that detect coronary murmurs, which are attached to a display and then provides a score associated with coronary artery disease risk. So now we're going to dive into corporate participation and their investment activity. Since 2013, corporate and corporate venture capital participation in medical devices has grown. In 2016, we saw $1.86 billion deployed over 102 deals, with corporates participating in those deals. Some recent deals include the $18.3 million Series C of CardiHeal, which is based in Israel, with participation from Johnson & Johnson Innovation, as well as the $23.1 million Series B of Neurotronic, with participation from Boston Scientific. CardiHeal was just in May, and is a medical device company that operates in the field of cartilage regeneration. Neurotronic is a developer of neurostimulation therapy for the enhancement of heart function. So it's comprised of a cardiac autonomic nerve stimulation delivered by way of a catheter that's placed in a vein just above the heart, which I thought was interesting. If we take a look at the top acquirers of medical device startups, just to point out a few trends, 60% of Medtronic's acquisitions since 2012 have occurred in 2015. And the median disclosed funding of a medical device startup prior to acquisition by Medtronic was about $34 million. As you can see here, Medtronic does lead the pack in terms of acquisitions of medical device startups, followed by companies such as Boston Scientific, BC Technical, Covidien, which was actually acquired by Medtronic in 2015, and Teleflex. A few recent deals include Medtronic's deal to Belco, their acquisition of Belco, which is hemodialysis for renal failure and organ failure. This was in February of 2016. There's 2 deals I do want to mention that are not featured on the graphic. Medtronic did make acquisition public to private deals of SearchAccount and Mako. So those deals are not featured because they are not the first exit of those startups. Their first exit would be the IPO. So this is what so that's what the graphic is trying to show, just first exits of startups. Another recent deal is Boston Scientific and Symetis, which is in heart valve replacements. This was in March of this year. And lastly, Teleflex made a deal to Nostix, which which develops products that increase the accuracy of devices, such as catheters, just in January of 2016. So one trend that we've noticed again and again is the use of corporate partnerships with digital companies to stimulate internal innovation. The medical device industry is using digital tools mostly for two reasons. One, to gain insight into how their products and treatments are performing. So there's been an increasing amount of attention paid towards value-based care as we move away from a fee-for-service model. So consequently, it's important for device companies to make arguments as to why their products are creating value. And digital partnerships such as these help them do that job. And two, because these device companies haven't had that customer feedback loop that's so native to software companies such as Facebook, and they want to enable that rapid iteration that they're seeing in this other industry and now realizing its potential. So we're going to talk about some partnerships of Medtronic in a moment. So just to point out a few here, Boston Scientific and Accenture have developed a cloud-based system designed to help providers make proactive and informed decisions based on insights into their patient population. So their partnership is going to take into account how patients are moved throughout the hospital, how they're diagnosed, monitored, and even educated. It's initially tailored for heart failure, but they plan to expand the system eventually. Another fascinating partnership is one between Stryker and Microsoft. Stryker is actually using the Microsoft HoloLens technology, which is an augmented reality platform, to enable the planning of operating room design without the need for mock setups. So as it stands, when you transfer from a neurosurgery procedure, say to a gastrointestinal procedure, and you're using the same operating room, the team has to reconfigure the entire operating room just for the new procedure. And the planning of this is often takes quite long and involves the moving of physical equipment and wasted hours of the team. So what Stryker and Microsoft are trying to do is allow the team to do this in augmented reality, so they don't actually have to go into the operating room and can actually do it remotely, which saves time and effort on half of the medical team. But one important trend is that while traditional medical device companies are usually the only ones active in the space, nowadays we're seeing tech giants such as Google and its life science arm, Verily, patenting medical devices and even augmented reality platforms for use in medical settings. So this patent, which are shown here and was uncovered on the CB Insights database, was published just last week and involves a device worn on the wrist that is able to detect particles in the blood which may be indicative of diseases such as cancer. Another tech giant that has been active in devices is Apple. Apple has been active in healthcare, often skirting the line between consumer device and medical device, as it's doing with the Apple Watch, which is now said to be able to detect cardiac arrhythmias. So this patent, which was published just 3 weeks ago, involves a wearable device that non-invasively measures blood pressure through sensors attached to a device worn on the wrist, as you could imagine, similar to an Apple Watch. So a few medical device deals to digital health companies I just wanted to highlight here. We're going to talk about Medtronic, St. Jude Medical, and Covidien, which, as you know, is now part of Medtronic. Just to highlight a few, the company FireOne, which is actually fairly secretive and working on remote monitoring devices. It's backed by NEA, Medtronic, as well as Covidien. Another company, CardioMEMS, was acquired by St. Jude Medical in 2014. And CardioMEMS is an implantable system that monitors changes in pulmonary artery pressure, which is an early indicator of the onset of worsening heart failure. So, as we spoke about earlier, Medtronic is leading the pack in terms of medical device acquisitions. But among top device corporates, Medtronic is the most active in terms of digital health startups, acquisitions of device companies, as well even strategic partnerships. But internal development at Medtronic has not taken a back seat. Announced in September of 2016, they actually received FDA approval for the first ever device designed to automatically monitor blood sugar and provide basal insulin as needed. Two notable initiatives of Medtronic I wanted to point out was one with IBM Watson and one with Samsung. So Watson has only been going on for about the past 2 years, and just this past September, they announced the Sugar IQ with Watson app, which was billed as the first cognitive app for people with diabetes. The app monitors glucose and insulin data from Medtronic pumps in real time, goes through the data with Watson, and then provides personalized insights such as major shifts in glucose when the patient eats specific meals, for example. One example of a use case would be a personalized recommendation that this particular patient happens to have low glucose from 2 to 5 on Saturdays, and then it'll teach that patient how to deal with that issue. Medtronic also went into a similar deal with Samsung to develop a mobile app that monitors glucose. So pictured in the back here is actually from the Stryker Microsoft partnership, developing their HoloLens augmented reality headset for operating room design, in case you're interested. Now we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence in the medical device sector. So healthcare has emerged as one of the hottest sectors where artificial intelligence is being applied. You can see how artificial intelligence is relevant to healthcare in general, and that most patients would rather trust a very experienced physician over a young resident. The reason being, the older doctor is able to draw on a wealth of knowledge gained and patterns recognized over decades of learning in order to draw more accurate conclusions. So instincts that would take this physician perhaps years to develop are now being gained from machine learning algorithms in a matter of days in order to provide the right training data. One important thing to note is that it's very easy for AI to be applied to medical device procedures which are conducive to it. So fields such as radiology, for instance, or tracking heart rate or detecting arrhythmias, whereas mental health is sometimes a lot more difficult for things such as AI to be applied to. So where is AI actually being applied in healthcare? On the left, I highlighted three sectors which run in line with medical devices. That is lifestyle management and patient monitoring, imaging and diagnostics, and wearables. In imaging and diagnostics, about 1/3 of healthcare AI startups that raised after January of 2015 were actually working in this sector. The category has become more saturated with companies in recent years compared to other areas of healthcare AI, and we'll take a look at a few of those in this section. In fact, more than 80% of the deals here were raised after January 2015, showing that it is a very new and fairly hot sector right now. Part of the reason for this explosion is the realization that imaging is one of the most perfect areas to apply AI algorithms to. For one, there's a wealth of training data available. There's clear diagnoses that can be made most of the time, and the current system is particularly subject to interpretation, especially with difficult diagnoses such as early stage breast cancer. Another sector we're going to cover is wearables. Deals in this category have been fluctuating, but saw a bit of an uptick in 2016. We're seeing startups such as BioBeats and TinyKicks, which raised rounds last year, while the company Centrion, which is a remote patient monitoring startup and works in wearables as well, raised one of the largest ever rounds in this category, which was a $12 million Series A, backed by companies such as Telus Ventures and Frost Data Capital. So here we're just going to highlight a few companies working in monitoring, wearables, and imaging. I won't get into each one, but a company that pops up again and again is Glooko in monitoring. Glooko has made an FDA-cleared Class 2 device, which falls basically between dental floss and heart valves on the scale risk we spoke about earlier. And this device allows patients to sync data from their glucose monitoring device to the smartphone. Glooko is now used in over 4,800 health systems across 27 countries. In wearables, I want to highlight TinyKicks. This is another company worth mentioning, and they develop a wearable monitor that tracks a baby's movements in the room and uploads it to a smartphone. So as we said earlier, they're not considered a medical device because they are just a health monitor. But we've learned from their CEO that they are developing a medical device as well, and they will be applying for that 510(k) clearance on that product. In imaging, to highlight Bay Labs. Bay Labs is using deep learning to help medical professionals in developing countries. They're helping them interpret ultrasounds so they can better treat heart disease. The software will first be applied in the developing world in cases of rheumatic heart disease. So just to focus for a moment on radiology, on the left-hand side, you see William Röntgen, his radiograph of his wife's hand in December 22 of 1895, shortly after his discovery of the X-rays. We've come a long way since then, and right now there's a lot of focus on image quality and form factor, such as the modern CT scan you see in the middle. This allows us now to strip away bone and tissue and focus only on vasculature in order to better identify malformations such as aneurysms. Now, while extremely valuable, this technology will not scale diagnostics. That's where the companies on the right come in. Going forward, there will be a focus on interpreting image data quickly, accurately, and perhaps even automatically. This will enable physicians around the world to use modern technologies to make diagnoses that they otherwise would not be able to. One company to highlight here is Butterfly Network, and they're basically leading the charge on democratization of diagnostics. The company is 6 years old and still in R&D, but with $100 million in funding and the backing of a serial entrepreneur named Jonathan Rothberg, who had previously sold 2 DNA sequencing companies for over $500 million. They have plenty of potential. So Butterfly Network is developing an AI-enabled ultrasound on a chip. The device will recognize objects and make preliminary diagnoses, and eventually it's intended to bring imaging to the poorest corners around the world. On the right, you'll see a patent of theirs that we found using the CB Insights patent search, which shows how they intend for the device to look. As you can see, it'll be very small, taking the form of either a smartphone or an iPad, extremely portable, as well as delivering preliminary diagnoses. So now we're going to talk about exit activity and some recent M&A trends. So there were 133 first-time M&As in medical device companies in 2016 and 14 IPOs, which were both somewhat down since 2015. Some recent first exits in the space include the IPOs of Endra and Visioneering Technologies. Endra is working on ultrasound technology, and they were valued at $16.8 million, and Visioneering Technologies works in contact lenses. We also saw the acquisitions of Medicametrics, which works in urological devices, by Cardiff, and Seal Medical, which develops a catheter used to measure endotracheal tube position, and they were acquired by Vyaire Medical. So out of the subset of medical device companies with both disclosed funding and valuation data, the median total funding raised prior to the first acquisition was about $38 million. Medtronic has become more active recently with acquisitions of companies such as Baylis, Belco, and Medina. Meanwhile, Covidion's acquisition pattern stopped when it was acquired by Medtronic. I just want to highlight another company here, Stryker, which we did not get a chance to talk about earlier. Stryker is known for its focus on orthopedic devices. They tend to acquire companies in this space, as you might imagine. In fact, 70% of their medical device startup purchases since 2012 have been orthopedics companies. Some recent deals include the 2016 acquisitions of Intratech, which was focused on devices for hand and foot surgery, and Ivy Sports Medicine, which is working on knee repair devices. So now we're going to talk about the road ahead and how cybersecurity is affecting the medical device sector. So this study here gives us an idea of the scope of the problem in cybersecurity and medical devices. This was published just in December of 2016. These researchers found that they could steal the patient information, flatten the device's battery, or send malicious messages to a pacemaker. Now, the attacks they developed can be performed up to 5 meters away using standard equipment, but more sophisticated antennas could increase this distance by tens or hundreds of times. Now, while this was technically in a research setting, there are a few real-world examples of where cybersecurity has become a major issue in this sector. For example, in March of 2016, it was announced that security researchers found over 1,400 exploitable flaws in the Pyxis supply station, which is manufactured by CareFusion. Now, the Pyxis station is important because it's a storage device for medical supplies, and it's found in most hospitals. It monitors what goes in and what comes out. Now, if attacked, it's possible that the system could be shut down remotely, cutting off caregivers from crucial medical supplies. Then in October of 2016, Johnson & Johnson told its patients that it had learned of a vulnerability in one of its insulin pumps that could potentially be exploited to overdose diabetic patients. And even as recently as January of 2017, the FDA had confirmed vulnerabilities in the St. Jude device. Last summer, St. Jude cardiac monitors were somewhat famously claimed to be vulnerable to attacks. And so in January of this year, the FDA did confirm that they are vulnerable. Potential effects include rapid battery depletion, inappropriate timing of when electric shocks are delivered as well. However, the FDA in this case did add that the health benefits outweigh the cybersecurity risks in this one particular case. So here I just wanted to highlight a quote from Houman Hakami, who's the executive vice president at Medtronic Diabetes. He kind of talks about the overall trend of using device data from companies, say, such as Glooko or other startups that are now helping medical device companies iterate continuously and actually receive feedback from their patients. So he states that we've got to not only be in medical devices, but we've got to use the data from those devices, turn that into intelligence, and then have patients and providers be able to take that data and make actionable decisions based on that. Looking ahead, we are seeing a few trends pop up. Going forward, there'll be basically two very observable ones to keep an eye on. One is being the increasing interconnectedness of devices, as we see here with companies like Teleflex and Abbott debuting smartphone-connected devices. And others are concerned that regulation around apps with clear medical indications will be or won't be FDA regulated. These are issues that Apple is now raising. Along with both these issues comes the problem of cybersecurity, as we just spoke about. So there's already been problems, as we saw with St. Jude cardiac monitor, and more recently with the ransomware outbreak in Europe. Connected devices will come with risk, and biological cybersecurity will become a huge field as connected implantable heart monitors, prosthetics, neurological implants basically become the norm. So thank you all for listening, and we'll now be taking a few questions. Okay, so we have a few questions coming in. I'm just going to try to answer a couple of them. The first one I see here is, what can medical device companies do to protect themselves from cybersecurity attacks? That's a very good question. So in late of 2016, the FDA actually released guidances for devices that are already approved and in the field. And they basically provide a framework for assessing cybersecurity risk across the product's life cycle. They also give directions on how to identify cybersecurity risk across the entire system. Okay, another question we have here is, would you say medical device companies are acquiring or investing in startups more? Okay, I would say I think the data shows that medical device companies tend to acquire more than invest in other medical device startups. The reason being, as hard as it is for a medical device company to exit, it makes more sense for corporate giants such as Medtronic or Strykers of the world to just acquire the technology and kind of build it into their own platform than invest in them and hope for some potential IPO. Okay. Another question we have here regards Gauss. So they're asking, why is Gauss Surgical considered a device if it works on an iPad? Interesting, very good question. So Gauss Surgical did have to apply for the 510(k) FDA clearance, as I mentioned before. The reason being is after a procedure, when surgeons are cleaning up, they're counting the sponges, which are covered in blood, and usually estimate blood loss just based on experience. They say, 1 liter, 2 liter, 3 liters. They don't really have an accurate count. But that count is very important because it determines whether or not you'll have to give the patient blood following surgery or fluids, and how much you'll have to give them. So a device that is now going to replace the surgeon's estimation of that actually has direct consequences on treatment protocols. So if the device the Gauss device gets the amount of blood estimated completely wrong, and the patient is giving too much fluid or too little fluid, those can have severe impact on the patient's health. So that's basically why it's considered a device, is because they have a direct effect on treatment protocols. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much for listening. The presentation will be sent out to you all if you missed any slides, and thank you again.